CEO of Colligo Networks. Our next speaker has been a technology innovator and entrepreneur for over 25 years. He is a recognized expert on SharePoint client technology and managed Colligo's popular SharePoint blog, which discusses important issues in email and records management, governance, and compliance, as well as technology trends affecting the SharePoint and ECM markets. Here today to talk about SharePoint mobility, please welcome Barry Jinks. Mic working now? Great. Hi. Okay. Thanks very much. Appreciate that. Bit of a couple of questions. First, how many of you are here from the Washington area? Great. How many of you are hockey fans? Okay. Well, I'm a Canadian, so I'm sorry. Hockey is my life, and when I'm not working. And the strike is killing me, I gotta say, because we can't play the Capitals. But anyway, but I am a Canadian. I'm from Vancouver. And my mic is right here. Yeah. There we go. Oh. Okay. Sorry. I guess I was turned off. Okay. One other question. Let's get. I want to get an idea of the demographics of the room. So, how many of you are in IT? Great, most of you. How many are in the C-suite, CXO, CIO, that kind of thing? Couple. How about line of business people running, like VP of some department or something? None of you. Okay. Okay. So this is mainly an IT audience, which is good. I can get into the plumbing a little bit. All right. So this is. I wanted to start off with this. I'm sitting on my, I've been using an iPad for this presentation. And time check here, it's about, what, 10:02, so I've got till about, what, quarter after, something like that? About 25 minutes? Okay. All right. So this is, an iPad I'm using. I'm, typical sort of mobile worker. I've chosen my device here. And this is the kind of interface that I get out of the box with SharePoint. Unfortunately, this is on our corporate intranet, so I've got a VPN in. How many of you had tried VPNing on our Wi-Fi here today? Okay. How successful have you been doing that? Not successful, right? So this would not work. If I press the button here, I'm not going to get anything. It's not going to happen. I'm just going to get nothing, right? So SharePoint is fine, in many situations out of the box, but when you're traveling, you need to have a different tool. You need to have a different interface. Your corporation's decided to use SharePoint. We use SharePoint extensively for our intranet, but I'm not going to be able to access that very well. So, for me, it's important that I have a tool that supports my mobility on SharePoint. So I'm going to show you one, and I'm here and today I'm not here to advertise our product particularly, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the considerations around mobility. This is a tool, Colligo Briefcase, and I'm going to run the presentation from this. Now, what you'll find with this tool that's interesting is I don't have to worry about the VPN. A couple of reasons for that. One, it supports poking a hole through the firewall using Forefront Gateway, so I don't need to use the VPN. But the other thing it does is it extensively caches your data so that I have it all with me and anywhere I go. So, and it does that all in the background. I'll have to think about that. So I'm going to go to our marketing intranet here, which has been cached in my hotel room, and I'm going to pick the presentation I'm going to give today of here. And so just so you can see, I sort of walk the talk here and use our own tools. So I'm going to talk about the implications of integrating mobile with SharePoint. A little bit about Colligo. We are a SharePoint app company, and we focus on records management, email management, content management, and collaboration. So what we're really doing is focusing around how people access and contribute information in an enterprise. And we have tools that essentially transform the SharePoint user interface from a conventional web interface to something that's appropriate to the tool or the workflow that people use every day. So we have integrations into Outlook. We have integrations into Windows Explorer. We have offline products. We have products that work on mobile devices like iOS. upcoming Android and Mac. So the idea is to try to create very much like you're seeing with Box.net or Dropbox, the ability to be able to get your content on any device, anywhere you're working. And we're a Microsoft Gold Certified Partner, or I guess they call it Gold Partner now in collaboration. We're actually a vendor to Microsoft, so Microsoft uses our tools, particularly the Outlook integration tools. And we've got a lot of deployments in Fortune 500, so we're dealing with a lot of big companies with deployments up in the 25 to 50,000 seat range. And got to work all over the world. We have offices in the US, Canada, and in Europe. Okay, lots of big customers. The old big customer slide. Okay, so I wanted to talk about a concept that, and actually Mark touched on this earlier, the concept of transforming the workplace and how things are changing. And how many of you have heard of this term that Gartner has coined called the nexus of forces? So a couple of people. This is a really interesting concept, which I would highly recommend you just go into Bing and type in Gartner nexus of forces. They've got tons of information on this. But they're talking a lot about how it's actually not just about mobile, and it's not just about social. In fact, there's 4 forces that are converging to create a completely new information architecture. And that's mobile, social, cloud, and information. And that group of 4 is essentially disrupting, and it's the basis for the technology platform of the future. So leveraging those 4 things together is really what's changing how people communicate and collaborate. And what's interesting about the nexus is it's driven by people. So we've all heard of consumerization, I think. So consumerization is this concept that, I don't know, some of you may have heard of Geoffrey Moore, the guy who wrote Crossing the Chasm. And he has this sort of statement, which is, I'm so powerful as a consumer, why am I so lame in the workplace? Why do I go in there and I'm given crappy tools and I'm told this is the way we do it here? And that's so 3 years ago, okay? It is not possible to do that anymore. You need to recognize that the user is at the center of everything we do in IT. We have to think about how that impacts the user, because the user has the power now. We have a different demographic coming up. People who are used to using social tools, used to working mobile, and they won't accept the old ways of working. So everything that we all should be thinking about has to at least end up at the consumer, at the user. We have to think about the user in everything we do. And if you look at consumerization, you look at the use of iPad at work. This is a summary that was done earlier this year. And this is the use of personal iPads at work. So you can see that 67% of people that use iPads at work, 67% of the people that own iPads use them at work in North America. And the demographics change around the world. It's obviously more prevalent in North America and Western Europe than it is in Asia, but it's happening everywhere. So people are bringing their own devices in. And this is the thing called BYOD. We've all heard of BYOD. It's a pain in the butt for IT to support people's personal devices, but it's being demanded. And in fact, it's being demanded not because of the user. It is being demanded because of the user, but the problem is that the CIO and the CEO all carry these devices. So they're coming to you and saying, you better support my devices. Why? What the heck? You don't support my devices? And by the way, I just tried to hire this fantastic Harvard Business School grad. And they came in and they looked at our IT infrastructure, and I told them they have to use this BlackBerry to get their email. I don't really have we don't support iPhones, and we don't support any kind of mobile. We don't really have a mobility strategy. And they said, sorry, I'm going to go work for the competition. So you better figure this out. And the thing is that people are collaborating and sharing information across multiple devices. It's not just, you can't support anymore, a Windows desktop, and that's all we support. You have to support iPhones and Macs and all these other nasty things that you didn't have to support before. Now, here's an interesting thing. So, I mean, we're all here because we love SharePoint, and we love SharePoint as a company. We think it's phenomenal. And it's really just kind of started, in a sense, because I think if you look at the cycle of SharePoint adoption, 2010 was the first time you had a really fantastic enterprise-grade, enterprise content management system with all the metadata and everything that you need to be able to build and scale. And really what's happening is we're seeing out there a lot of companies are really just getting into deploying SharePoint. Maybe it's been a few pockets here and there, but now you're getting into heavy application development on SharePoint. So it's becoming the backbone. I mean, 70% of enterprises own SharePoint and have deployed SharePoint. So it's becoming the backbone of information in companies all across the world. And we think that's fantastic. But when you look and you ask people who are like yourselves, who are responsible for SharePoint, does it satisfy your needs for certain things? This is a recent AIM study. I don't know if you guys have got this, but just go to the AIM site. It's about the holes in SharePoint. I can't remember what the exact title is, but they surveyed 551 of their members from May 30th to June 25th, 2012. And they said, how does SharePoint satisfy your needs in the following areas? Number one is, collaboration, workspaces, team sites. Of course, we all know that SharePoint does that very well. It's probably the world's leading platform there. And, for most people, it's either completely satisfies or partially satisfies their needs there. But, you kind of go down the list, and I'm not going to go through it in great detail, but at the bottom of the list is mobile device access. So the thing that was least satisfactory for these 551 people is mobile device access. So how many of you here that are responsible for SharePoint have a fully supported mobile access to SharePoint program? Like, you're proud of it, it works well? Zero. OK. So, it is a pain point. And actually, what's interesting about that is they asked in the survey somewhere else, how many of you are using, what are your plans for third-party add-on usage to SharePoint? And they ask, how many are using it today? How many have firm plans in the next 12 months to use it? And these are the two highest growth areas. There's actually about a list of about 20 or so things. Highest growth area, number one, is additional social feeds and functions. So 4% are using it today, going to 22% in the next 12 months. 7% for mobile device access, going to 27%. And that's so 4 times the number of people in the next 12 months are going to be looking for ways to make SharePoint mobile. So you're not alone if you have that problem, because a lot of other people have it too. What's interesting about this too, if you look at the 2011 study, mobility didn't even make it to the top 20. So it's changing so rapidly. Because of this consumerization thing, people are getting forced. You are in this room are getting forced by your company to deal with this. So hopefully this is interesting to you, because this is some of the implications around what you have to do if you're considering integrating SharePoint with mobility in your enterprise. So the first thing is, recognizing it's broader than just giving somebody access to their team site. It's really about changing the way you do business. It's changing the business processes in your company. People are no longer tied to the office. What does that mean? That means that people can access information anywhere they're working. That means that you're actually getting people that never could access information, that never were your SharePoint users, onto SharePoint. Because now they can access SharePoint wherever they're working. So factory workers, people in the field that never, because you couldn't get access over the VPN, because you had these issues, never considered to be users. They're now on SharePoint. And the kinds of things they want to do, it's not just accessing SharePoint. And it's interesting, because when we delivered our first product, it was a read-only product. We thought, oh, these devices aren't for information capture. I mean, they're really just for information consumption. That's what we were being told. We put it out, and that number one thing people said is, we got to be able to contribute. We got to be able to capture stuff. You know, people want to modify and edit documents. They want to capture pictures. They want to do all these things on these devices. These are content capture devices. And when you start thinking about putting out, you know, you're a company of 10,000 people, and you've got 10,000 people out there capturing information and putting it into SharePoint, it changes the game. It changes, it's the leverage, it's huge leverage for your business, but it changes the game. So, you know, people are moving from just being down desktops to having iPads and other devices. So it's business processes everywhere. And it's not just, it's not just about, you know, one or two industries. Every industry is being affected by this. You all know that. I'm sure all of you in this room have some problems or issues or opportunities with mobile. And in fact, talking about opportunities, you know, it's no longer a niche area. Mobile is not, you know, there's just a few people over in the corner. It's a huge opportunity across the entire enterprise. And what it is, actually, is it's a huge opportunity for you who are SharePoint lovers and SharePoint evangelists to get more at people on SharePoint. I mean, that's what SharePoint is built for. It's built to be the hub of information in the enterprise. And if you don't support the mobile workers, you're not supporting a large and very fast-growing group of people. And you can actually push business logic out to the field. You can build business processes in SharePoint, and you can push those out. So you can have people work in a specific way now when they're not in the office, which is quite useful. The other thing that, of course, is that it changes the audience for SharePoint to everyone in the company. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, so many different industries and so many different kinds of people are getting enabled by this. And you know, if you look at the kinds of scenarios we're seeing on iPads in particular and on our Android devices is, you know, things like boards of directors. I mean, this is a small problem, small number of people in your company, but obviously a very, very influential group. And almost everybody we deal with says, oh, by the way, our board of directors wants to, you know, we build our team site, and you know, we build our board team site in SharePoint. We want to have access to that. So pushing out sales materials, that's a big one for us. So that's pushing out, you know, your sales force wants to consume content. Your product managers want to send stuff out to the sales force. So content distribution is a big one. Service manuals out to service workers in the field, people who are, you know, repairing machines, whatever. Form filling. So pushing forms out to people so that they can fill them in the field. And then legal departments, obviously, you know, for compliance and that sort of thing. So there's lots of new areas where mobile is being used. Now, there's some big implications about this. The first thing is that users have very high expectations when they come onto a device like this. I mean, they're used to applications that were built by, you know, two guys in a garage, but they've dedicated their life to it, and they love what they do. So they're phenomenally interesting and fun things to use. They may be crappy from a security point of view. They're not really enterprisey, but they are, you know, there's thousands of applications that people can download, and they're used to extremely robust interfaces. So the user expectations are high. And they want to interact. People want, these are real-time devices. They want to be able to interact with data. So you got to think about that in terms of there's very high expectations of the users. But you have, on the other side of that, you have real issues around deployment and control. I mean, we all know that. I mean, you all know that. Like, that's probably your biggest number one concern is, oh, is this secure? What happens if it gets into the, you know, the wrong hands? What happens if they lose the device? What happens if they leave the company? What happens to our data? And also, how do I get it out to people? I mean, 10,000 users, they're not very savvy. They don't know SharePoint. They, you know, how do I make it easy for them? How do I make it as easy for them to access SharePoint as it is for them to play Angry Birds? You know, that's kind of the paradigm you're working in. And if you're traveling, do you have connectivity all the time, or do you need to cache information? So there's kind of some of the things that you need to think about. Now, if you look at it in particular, one of the things that we work with a lot when we work with customers is integrating into their MDM environment. How many of you out there have chosen an MDM for your companies that you know of? A couple, yeah. And you may not know, because I know that we find sometimes in companies, the SharePoint group is completely disconnected from the mobile group. And that's actually going to change. I mean, you cannot, if you look at this nexus of forces, mobility and cloud people, which I kind of put SharePoint in, need to be interacting together every day. And that will change, I guarantee you. But MDMs are a big part of this. And MDMs are the way that you can get control of these devices. And so MDMs are things like, you have to consider whether you have a heavyweight solution. There's tremendous, like Good has a great solution which is completely secure. I mean, it's essentially like a bubble on the iPad, and any data and applications you push out to that bubble are completely firewalled from anything else on the iPad. Great solution, very heavy to deploy. Every application has to be ported to Good, blah, blah, blah. And there's soft solutions as well that are much more policy-based. They just kind of ensure that people follow certain governance policies on the iPad itself. Are you going to support personally owned devices? Are you going to support corporate-owned devices? Ultimately, what you want to do, and we have a lot of customers that support both, you want to be able to support both. People come in with their own iPhone. Hey, can you support this? We also find, what's interesting, that we find that demographically, the US tends to be BYOD. Europe tends to be corporate-owned. So depending on where you are, there's different policies around that. Security, these MDMs allow you to set up a security periphery on your iPads. Governance, how do I expire content? How do I, what happens if somebody's iPad gets stolen? How do I take that off? So these things all have the capabilities of doing that. So if you're going to get into mobility, you need to look at the capabilities of the MDMs, and they can help you to solve these issues. According to the Gartner's Magic Quadrant 2012, these are the top 5 MDM vendors: Enprise, Mobile Iron, who we've worked with a lot, AirWatch, FiberLink, and Good. And all of those companies have their own MDM solutions and different spins on the same thing. The other thing, and I mentioned this earlier, is it's all about usability. It's all about ensuring that you support the needs of the end user. End users, a lot of the time, don't understand SharePoint. They don't understand the architecture of your intranet. And they certainly don't want to fiddle around with things in the field and spend hours trying to sort of figure it out. So typically, and if you look at kind of what they're used to, again, we're going back to this consumerization thing. We're going back to the nexus of forces. A lot of people are on Dropbox. They're on box.net. They look at these very simple applications. And they say, why isn't SharePoint that simple? And the simplicity in that is that, you sign up for the service, you put some data into the service, and then it just magically appears on all your devices. So that's the kind of experience they're looking for. And so you have to think about information management. How do I push information out to users? How do I centrally configure these devices so that, I can disable certain functions or I can enable certain functions? How do I make sure that it's usable, that the information architecture renders well on one of these devices? And how can I get analytics back from that? Who's using what content? This is a huge and interesting area. This is probably the biggest growth area for us, the area where most people are asking for us to enhance our features, is around analytics. Users want to know, who's the audience for my content? If I push something out to 10,000 salespeople on iPads, I want to know that 10,000 of them have downloaded the latest data sheet. Or price list. I don't want them to be working on the old price list. I want to know how many of them have actually downloaded it. So that sort of thing. So there's a lot going on there. And of course, risks. Lots of big risks. The devices themselves, particularly iPads and Androids, frankly, are pretty insecure devices. You really have to think about the applications that you're putting out there. Most applications built for consumers don't consider these issues. And a lot of the time, the data is in the clear. A lot of the time, the credentials are in the clear. So you really want to be careful about the app. It's highly, test them thoroughly before they go into the field. And things like, what happens if I leave data onto legal issues, like what happens if I leave data on these iPads and there's the smoking gun, right? There's that piece of information that is out sitting on somebody's iPad that is now part of a litigation. How do I know that where that is and what that data is? So lots of issues around that you have to think about. And I'm just going to close with the top 5 device security concerns that people have. And these are things that when you choose an application to interface with SharePoint, you need to make sure that the applications are very well behaved around these issues. One is, what happens if the device is jailbroken? Can a hacker get access to the data? Can the hacker get access to the credentials that are on that device? Encrypting of the cache is another one. So a lot of applications have very poor encryption technology. So you've got to look at that. As I mentioned, cache credentials and passcodes. What about consumer devices and consumer applications security? So if I've got, say, I've got a secure application that I'm working with, and I want to open a file from that secure application in another application that isn't secure, suddenly I've taken it out of the security zone and put it into an insecure application. So you've got to look at the things that people can do within that application. And then the last one, which we all have to be concerned about, is all of these devices inherently connect to consumer file sharing services, like Dropbox. And that's one thing we see a lot of people doing. It's like, oh, I'll use Colligo's SharePoint app to download stuff to my iPad, and then I'll try to put it in Dropbox. And we have ways of disabling that. But once it goes into Dropbox, it gets completely out of your security perimeter. So that's it. I'm not going to spend much more time, but I will say, if you want to, please email me. If you want to talk, ask any questions, bjinks@colligo.com. I'm on Twitter at bjinks, and we've got a lot of white papers on this and other things on our website. Thank you.